When I questioned that method of portrayal, a different path opened up for me. The path to my destiny.
3 days. 3 days sitting on the floor of a building that didn't want to hear him. 3 days fighting for the one place that had ever made him feel like his voice mattered. And they still said no. Imagine that. You give everything you have. You stand up when everyone else looks away. You fight knowing you might lose. And then you lose. What do you do with that? What do you do when the system looks you in the eye and tells you that what you love doesn't deserve to exist? Most people lower their heads. Most people walk away. But this man didn't walk away. And years later, the place that crushed him would carry his name forever. But this isn't just a story about winning in the end. It's about something that happens before the winning, something most people never talk about. The moment when you fight with everything you have, and it still isn't enough, because that moment is where everything actually begins. Before anyone knew his name, he was just a boy from a small city in the American South, the kind of place where the world feels small, where dreams feel distant, where you learn early that certain doors weren't built for people like you. But he had something inside him that refused to accept that. From the time he was a teenager, he believed that stories had power, that the right story told the right way could change how people see themselves, could change how they see the world. So when the time came, he turned down a basketball scholarship. He chose the arts. He enrolled in one of the most prestigious, historically black universities in the United States. And from the moment he arrived, something shifted inside him. For the first time in his life, he was in a place where black stories weren't an afterthought, where the history of his people wasn't something to be ashamed of or hidden away in a footnote, where who you were actually mattered. And at the center of that world was a single college, a place built specifically to train black artists, black directors, black writers, black performers. A place that had shaped generation after generation of voices the world would come to know. It had given the world celebrated actresses, legendary musicians, pioneering writers, and he fell in love with it. Completely, this was his home. This was the place that was going to give him the tools to tell the stories he had always believed needed to be told. So you can imagine what he felt when they announced they were going to take it away. In 1997, the university administration made a decision, a quiet one, the kind that powerful institutions make when they assume no one is really paying attention. They announced that the College of Fine Arts would be absorbed into a larger department, dissolved, merged, erased. It sounded like paperwork, like an administrative adjustment. But for him and for every student who had chosen that school because of what it represented, it was something else entirely. It was a message that Black artistic voices didn't need their own space, that they could simply be folded in with everything else, made smaller, made invisible, made easier to ignore. And most students accepted it because that is what you do when institutions decide things. You lower your head. You tell yourself it doesn't matter. You move on, but he couldn't move on. He was 20 years old, no money, no power, no famous name, just a student who believed that what was being taken was worth fighting for. So he organized, he gathered his fellow students, and together they walked into the administration building and they sat down. They were not going to move until someone listened. 3 days. For 3 full days, they sat on those floors, in those hallways, in the very building that represented the power deciding their fate. Outside, the university kept moving. Classes were held. Meetings were scheduled. The world continued as if nothing was happening. But inside those halls, a group of young Black students refused to be invisible. They presented their arguments. They made their case. They explained with everything they had why this college mattered, why erasing it was not a small administrative decision, but a statement about whose voices the university believed were worth protecting. He spoke, he argued, he refused to leave. One of his classmates at the time, a young writer who would later become one of the most celebrated literary voices of his generation, was there watching this young man stand in the middle of a system that was telling him no and refused to accept it. But the administration had already made up their minds. And on the 3rd day, after 3 days of sitting, 3 days of arguing, 3 days of believing that someone would listen, the decision came down. The College of Fine Arts would be dissolved. The schools would be merged, and that was final. He had given everything he had, and it wasn't enough. The place he loved was gone. And then, more than a decade, after sitting on that floor, more than a decade, after being told his voice didn't deserve its own space, he walked onto a movie set. And this time, he wasn't playing a nobody. He was playing a legend, a man who had broken one of the most powerful color barriers in American history. And the world finally saw him, not as a type, not as a stereotype, not as someone else's assumption, but as a man, a full, complex, powerful man. That man was Chadwick Boseman. But that was only the beginning, because once the door opened, Chadwick didn't just walk through it. He rebuilt it entirely. Jackie Robinson, James Brown, Thurgood Marshall, one iconic black figure after another, played with a depth and a dignity that the industry had spent years telling him black stories didn't deserve. And then the role that changed everything, King T'Challa, the Black Panther. When that film was released in 2018, it didn't just break records. It shattered a lie that had been told for decades in boardrooms across Hollywood. The lie that black stories don't sell, that black heroes don't travel globally, that black audiences aren't worth the investment. More than $1 billion later, that lie was gone. And generations of children saw themselves as kings, as queens, as warriors, as royalty. For the very first time, Chadwick stood at the center of all of it. The man who once sat on a cold floor for 3 days fighting for a place that was being taken from him, now standing before the entire world wearing a crown. That same year, he returned to the university, to that same building, those same halls, and he stood before thousands of students and told them everything. The protest, the 3 days, the loss, and then he said this: although we took over the A building for several days and presented our arguments, the schools were still merged. He paused, and then when I dared to challenge the system that would relegate us to victims and stereotypes, when I questioned that method of portrayal, a different path opened up for me, the path to my destiny. What nobody in that audience knew was that he was already sick, had been fighting cancer in silence for 2 years, going through surgeries, through chemotherapy, through the slow, private devastation of a body fighting to survive while carrying the weight of an entire culture on its shoulders. And he never said a word. He just kept showing up for every role, for every story, for every child who needed to see themselves in a king. In 2020, he was gone, 43 years old, and the world finally learned what he had been carrying all along. Shortly after his passing, the university made an announcement. The College of Fine Arts, the same college, it was dissolved when he was 20 years old. The same walls where he sat on the floor for 3 days and lost would be reestablished, and it would carry his name forever. The Chadwick A. Boseman College of Fine Arts. His classmate who watched him protest became one of the greatest writers of his generation. His mentor, who believed in him, became the dean of the college that now bears his name. And the man who secretly funded his education helped lead the effort to build a brand new building in his honor. Every thread woven back together. Every fight vindicated. Think about that. The 20-year-old who sat on that floor and lost didn't just eventually win. He became the reason that place exists at all. So if you are in the middle of your fight right now, if you have given everything you have and it still wasn't enough, remember this. Sometimes the system wins the battle, but the people who refuse to stop fighting win something the system can never take away. Their name on the door, their story in the walls, their crown permanent. Sometimes the place that says no to you today carries your name forever.